Welcome back. This channel exists because of your support. Subscribe, hit like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Now let's get into the story. It was a regular Wednesday evening in our River West apartment, the kind of evening we'd shared hundreds of times over the past year and a half. The March air still held winter's chill outside, and I could hear our neighbor Mrs. Patterson walking her ancient beagle down the hallway. Emma was curled up on our second-hand couch, reading some book while I finished loading the dishwasher with our dinner plates. Spaghetti night, her favorite. This was our routine. I'd clean up the kitchen while she decompressed from her marketing job, and then we'd settle in together to watch something mindless on Netflix before bed. Simple, comfortable, exactly the kind of domestic bliss we'd built together since moving in. When I sat down next to her and put my arm around her shoulder like I had every evening for months, she pulled away like I'd just tried to grab a hot pan. Not just a gentle shift or a give me a second kind of move. A full recoil, complete with this look I'd never seen before. "We need to talk about something," she said, closing the book with a deliberate snap that echoed in our small living room. I could see the title now, embossed in gold letters across a purple cover. Boundaries in Love, Reclaiming Your Individual Identity in Romantic Relationships. Great. Okay, I said, settling back into the cushions and trying to keep my voice neutral. "What's on your mind?" But I could already feel something shifting in the room, some change in the atmospheric pressure that made my stomach tighten. Emma never wanted to have serious conversations during our wind-down time, and she definitely never read self-help books about relationships. "I've been thinking a lot about our relationship dynamic lately," she said, and the way she delivered the line sounded like she'd been practicing it in front of a mirror. Her posture was different too, straighter somehow, like she was preparing for a presentation. "I think we've fallen into patterns that aren't healthy for either of us. We're too enmeshed." Enmeshed. That was definitely a new word for us. In 3 years of dating, Emma had never used psychological terminology to describe our relationship. She was more likely to say we were being lazy or stuck in a rut if she thought we were getting too comfortable. "We live together, Em," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "We share a bed, split the rent, argue about whose turn it is to buy toilet paper. We're supposed to be close." "That's exactly what I mean." She set the book aside and turned to face me with this serious expression I'd never seen before, like a therapist delivering a diagnosis. "True intimacy requires individual integrity. I'm establishing healthy boundaries based on my principles." There it was. The phrase that would become my least favorite combination of words in the English language. The way she said principles made it sound like I'd been violating some fundamental law of the universe just by wanting to cuddle with my girlfriend after a long day. "What kind of boundaries are we talking about?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. "I need space from some of our physical and emotional patterns to maintain my sense of self." "This is about emotional integrity," she continued, like she was reading from a script. "We've developed codependent behaviors that prevent us from growing as individuals." Codependent. Another new word. I sat there for a moment, trying to process what she'd just said. 3 years together, 18 months living in this cozy apartment on Fratney Street, planning weekend trips to Madison, talking about maybe getting a dog when our lease renewed next spring. And suddenly she needed space from our patterns to maintain her sense of self. "Since when do you need to maintain your sense of self from me?" I asked. "Since always, Mike. I just never had the language for it before." The language for it. Right. Because apparently, our relationship had been some kind of oppressive situation that she'd finally learned the proper terminology to describe. I glanced at the book, wondering where she'd gotten it and who had recommended it. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, lighting up with a text notification. She glanced at it quickly, and I caught a glimpse of the name at the top of the screen. Jessica. That explained a lot. "So what does this mean exactly?" I asked. "It means I'm stepping back from the automatic physical affection and some of the emotional dependency we've developed. I need to rediscover my individual identity within our partnership." Individual identity. Emotional dependency. This was definitely Jessica's influence. Emma had been spending a lot of time with her lately. Jessica, who'd been divorced twice and had very strong opinions about how women needed to manage their relationships. "Okay," I said finally. "If that's what you need." She seemed surprised that I didn't argue. "Really? Yeah. If you need space to maintain your sense of self, then you should have it." She smiled then, the first genuine expression she'd shown all evening. Thank you for understanding. But I wasn't sure I understood anything. I watched her gather up her book and phone, heading toward the bedroom. She paused at the doorway. This doesn't change how I feel about you, she said. It's just about creating healthier dynamics. After she closed the bedroom door, I could hear her voice through the thin walls. Animated, excited even. Probably reporting back to Jessica about how well her boundary setting had gone. I stayed on the couch, thinking about that phrase. Establishing healthy boundaries based on her principles. The more I turned it over in my mind, the more it sounded like a weapon dressed up in self-help vocabulary. Thursday morning brought a fascinating new dynamic to our apartment. Emma moved around our small kitchen like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just redefined the fundamental terms of our relationship 12 hours earlier. She poured her coffee from the Mr. Coffee machine I'd bought her for Christmas, added her usual 2 sugars and splash of cream, checked her phone for messages, and started talking about her day like we hadn't just had the weirdest conversation of our 3-year relationship. Don't forget we're meeting Jessica and her new date Saturday at that wine bar on Brady Street, she said, stirring sugar into her mug with the little spoon that came with our mismatched silverware set. I told them 7:30. The place gets crowded after 8. I was sitting at our small breakfast table buttering toast, listening to her make plans for our social life like she always did. This was Emma's domain. She organized our social calendar, remembered birthdays, booked restaurant reservations, coordinated group activities. She was good at it, and I'd always been happy to let her take the lead. Like she was still in charge of organizing our weekend activities, even though she'd just stepped back from emotional dependency the night before. The irony wasn't lost on me. She needed space from physical intimacy to maintain her individual identity, but she still expected me to show up wherever she decided we should go. Actually, I said, setting down my knife and looking directly at her, I'm establishing healthy boundaries too. The spoon stopped moving in her coffee cup. She looked up at me with this confused expression, like I'd just started speaking in ancient Greek. I need space from planning our social life to maintain my sense of self. I continued, using her exact tone from the night before. This is about my individual integrity. She stared at me like I'd just announced I was joining a cult. What did you just say? You heard me. I'm stepping back from the automatic social planning and some of the household management dependency we've developed. I need to rediscover my individual identity within our partnership. I threw her own words back at her, complete with the therapeutic language she'd obviously picked up from that book or her recent conversations with Jessica. That's completely different, she stammered, setting her mug down harder than necessary on our small breakfast table. How? Because these are practical things. Someone has to organize these things. We can't just not have social plans. And someone has to maintain physical intimacy in relationships, I replied calmly. But you step back from that based on your principles. Her face started turning red, the way it always did when she was getting frustrated but trying to stay calm. You're being ridiculous. I'm being consistent. If we're establishing new boundaries about maintaining our individual identities, then they apply to both of us. I don't see why your need for emotional space is more valid than my need for logistical space. But I need you to handle these things, she said, and for the first time, I heard a hint of panic in her voice. And I needed you to not treat me like some boundary-violating stranger trying to impose unwanted physical contact. But here we are. She opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to realize she didn't have a good comeback. The logic was airtight, and she knew it. If establishing boundaries was about principles and individual integrity, then my boundaries were just as valid as hers. Instead, she picked up her coffee mug and headed for the stairs. This conversation isn't over, she called back. You're right, I said to her retreating figure. It's just getting started. I heard the bedroom door slam, followed immediately by the muffled sound of her voice on the phone, probably calling Jessica for backup and validation. But here's what she didn't understand yet. I wasn't playing some temporary game or trying to make a point. If she wanted to redefine what boundaries looked like in our relationship, then we were going to explore that definition thoroughly. Friday brought escalation that I could feel building from the moment Emma left for work that morning. She'd been texting someone constantly over breakfast, her thumbs flying across her phone screen with unusual intensity. When I asked who she was talking to, she'd given me a vague, just coordinating lunch plans that didn't quite ring true. She came home that evening carrying takeout from that expensive Thai place downtown, which was unusual since we typically cooked together on Friday nights. But more telling was her demeanor. She had the purposeful energy of someone who'd spent the afternoon getting strategic advice from Jessica and her sister Amanda, who was going through her own messy custody battle. "We need to discuss this situation," she announced, setting the food containers on our kitchen table and arranging them with deliberate precision. She was treating this like a business meeting, complete with the formal tone she used for difficult conversations at her marketing job. "Sure," I said, grabbing plates from the cabinet. "What's to discuss?" "What you're doing isn't the same as what I'm doing," she began, and I could tell immediately that she'd been coached on these talking points. The phrasing was too polished, too carefully constructed. What I established Wednesday was about personal boundaries and emotional health. "What you're doing is just being spiteful." I had to give her credit. That was a pretty sophisticated way to try to justify the double standard. Someone had helped her craft this argument, probably over pad thai and spring rolls at whatever restaurant she'd met Jessica and Amanda for their emergency strategy session. "So when you establish boundaries, it's about health?" I said, serving myself some curry. "When I establish boundaries, it's spite." "Yes, because household management and social coordination aren't the same as physical boundaries," she continued, clearly working from her prepared script. "One is about bodily autonomy. The other is about basic relationship maintenance." Interesting distinction. So my autonomy over my time and energy doesn't matter? That's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying? Because it sounds like you want the right to establish boundaries while denying me the same right. She took a breath, clearly moving to her next talking point. Physical intimacy is different because it involves consent and personal space. Household tasks are just part of living together. And emotional labor isn't part of living together. Planning your social life, remembering your appointments, managing your schedule, that's not intimate. That doesn't require my consent. I watched her realize that her carefully prepared arguments weren't holding up under basic scrutiny. Jessica and Amanda had apparently given her talking points, but not taught her how to defend them against logical questions. "You're twisting everything," she said, falling back on the default response of someone whose position was crumbling. "I'm applying your own logic consistently. You don't want to feel obligated to be affectionate just because we're in a relationship. I don't want to feel obligated to manage your social calendar just because we live together. You're being deliberately obtuse. I'm being precisely as obtuse as you were Wednesday night when you decided to redefine our entire relationship dynamic based on a book recommendation from your recently divorced coworker." That hit home. Her face flushed, and she set down her fork. "This isn't about Jessica, isn't it? When did you start reading relationship self-help books, Em? When did you start using words like enmeshed and codependent to describe us? Because 3 months ago, you were perfectly happy with our supposedly unhealthy patterns." She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. We both knew exactly when this had started. Right around the time Jessica had moved back to Milwaukee after her divorce, bitter and full of theories about how women needed to manage their relationships more strategically. "Fine," she said finally. "I'll organize my own social life." "Don't ask me," I replied. "I'm maintaining my sense of self." "Stop saying that." "Why? You seem to think it was a perfectly reasonable thing to say Wednesday night." She pushed back from the table, frustration written all over her face. "This is insane. You're acting like a completely different person." "No, I'm acting like someone who learned new vocabulary, boundaries, principles, emotional integrity. Turns out they're pretty useful concepts." The rest of the weekend followed the same pattern. Every request, every assumption, every little thing she'd taken for granted got the same response. Could I help her research apartments for when our lease was up? Sorry, I need space from housing decisions to maintain my individual identity. Could I pick up her prescription since the pharmacy was near my office? I'm establishing boundaries about running errands based on my principles. Saturday brought new desperation. Emma spent the morning on her phone, clearly coordinating something. I could hear fragments of conversation from the kitchen where she was stress cleaning our already clean apartment. "No, he's being completely unreasonable," she said to someone, probably Jessica. "Yes, I know you warned me this might happen, but I thought, okay, yes, that could work." A few minutes later, I heard her making another call. "Jessica, it's me. Listen, I need to cancel tonight. Something's come up with Mike's family." No, It's fine, we can reschedule. This is more important right now. When she hung up and came into the living room, she had that determined look she got when she'd made a decision. I was thinking we could have dinner at your parents' house tomorrow evening, she said, but something about the way she said it felt calculated. Your mom called yesterday and mentioned they haven't seen us in a few weeks. My mother had not called yesterday. I knew this because I'd talked to her Thursday evening, and she'd mentioned nothing about wanting to see us. But I also knew that Emma was setting something up, and I was curious to see what her plan entailed. That sounds nice, I said. Should we bring something? I already made that chocolate chip banana bread your dad likes, she said, gesturing toward the kitchen counter where a perfectly wrapped loaf sat cooling. Emma had never made banana bread for my family before. She was pulling out all the stops for whatever performance she had planned. By Sunday, she wasn't just frustrated. She was panicking. I watched her try different approaches. Guilt trips about how relationships require compromise. Logical arguments about practical responsibilities. Even attempts at sweetness that might have worked before. But I stayed consistent every single time. Sunday arrived with Emma's carefully orchestrated plan in motion. We arrived at my parents' house in Wauwatosa at 4 o'clock, Emma carrying her banana bread like some kind of peace offering. As planned, my dad was in the garage working on his ancient Buick, and my mom was in the kitchen preparing what she called Sunday supper, which was really just an excuse to cook too much food and force leftovers on whoever happened to be around. Kevin was already there, sprawled on the couch watching the Packers pregame show and drinking one of my dad's beers. My younger brother had graduated from UW-Madison in the spring and was working construction while he figured out what he wanted to do with his life. He was 22, unfiltered, and had never been particularly impressed by relationship drama. Hey, Mike, he called out as we walked in. Emma, good to see you. Mom's been cooking since noon, so I hope you're hungry. Emma smiled and chatted with Kevin while I went to help my mom in the kitchen. She was making pot roast with all the fixings, the kind of meal that took half the day to prepare and filled the house with the smell of home. How are you two doing? She asked, glancing toward the living room where Emma was asking Kevin about his job with exaggerated interest. We're fine, I said, though I suspected that status was about to be tested. She seems a little energetic today. My mother was observant. She'd raised 3 boys and had a sixth sense for when someone was up to something. Emma was definitely performing at a higher level than usual, laughing too loudly at Kevin's stories and complimenting my mom's decorating choices with unusual enthusiasm. Dinner proceeded normally until about halfway through the pot roast. Emma had been the perfect guest, complimenting the food, asking thoughtful questions about my parents' recent trip to Door County, and presenting her homemade banana bread which my dad had praised enthusiastically. She'd been volunteering to help with dishes and engaging with Kevin about his construction job with unusual enthusiasm. But I could feel her building towards something, like a storm gathering pressure. Mike's been a little different lately, she said during a lull in conversation, her voice carrying just the right note of concerned confusion. More distant, I guess. Not quite himself. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. Here it was. Different how? My mom asked, immediately shifting into protective mother mode. I'm probably just being sensitive, Emma continued, playing her role perfectly. But he seems withdrawn, like he's pulling away from our relationship. I keep trying to understand what's changed. Kevin looked up from his plate, suddenly interested. My dad set down his beer. My mom was studying my face with the intensity of a detective examining evidence. Is everything okay with work? My dad asked me. Work's fine, I said calmly. I wasn't going to let Emma control this narrative without presenting the facts. It's not work, Emma said quickly. It's more personal than that. More relationship-related. What kind of relationship problems? My mom pressed, her voice sharpening slightly. This was Emma's moment. She'd maneuvered the conversation exactly where she wanted it, with my entire family focused on her concerns about my behavior. In her mind, this was where the family pressure would kick in, where everyone would tell me to stop being difficult and go back to being the accommodating boyfriend she was used to. But she'd made a crucial miscalculation. She'd forgotten that my family knew me pretty well, and they also knew her. They could sense when something didn't add up. It's hard to explain, Emma said, playing the confused and hurt girlfriend perfectly. He's just different. Cold, I suppose. Like he doesn't want to be close anymore. I let her finish her performance before responding. She'd painted a picture of herself as the concerned girlfriend dealing with an inexplicably distant boyfriend. It was a good story, well delivered, and it might have worked if she'd been talking to people who didn't know us both. "Let me ask you all a question," I said, setting down my fork and looking around the table. "If someone told you Wednesday night that they needed to establish boundaries in their relationship and step back from physical intimacy to maintain their individual integrity, would you think it was reasonable for their partner to apply the same principle to other areas?" The room went very quiet. Kevin's beer stopped halfway to his mouth. My parents exchanged a glance. "What exactly did she say to you Wednesday night?" my mom asked, her tone shifting completely. Emma's face started to lose color. This wasn't how her script was supposed to go. "She told me she was establishing healthy boundaries based on her principles," I continued calmly. "She said she needed space from our physical and emotional patterns to maintain her sense of self. She said our relationship had become codependent and enmeshed." "Enmeshed?" my dad repeated, raising an eyebrow. And when I asked her what that meant practically, she explained that she was stepping back from automatic physical affection and emotional dependency to rediscover her individual identity within our partnership. Kevin let out a low whistle. "Damn, Emma, that's some serious therapy speak." "Language, Kevin," my mom said automatically, but her attention was focused entirely on Emma, who was looking increasingly uncomfortable. "So after she established her boundaries," I continued, "I figured it was only fair to establish some of my own. If she needed space from physical intimacy to maintain her sense of self, then I needed space from social planning and household management to maintain mine." "That's not the same thing," Emma said quickly, but her voice lacked the confidence she'd shown earlier. "How is it different?" my dad asked. "Sounds like the same principle to me." "Because physical boundaries are about consent and personal autonomy," Emma said, falling back on her coach talking points. "Household responsibilities are just basic partnership obligations." "So your autonomy matters, but his doesn't?" Kevin asked, cutting straight to the heart of it with the brutal honesty that only younger brothers can deliver. "It's more complicated than that," Emma insisted. "Is it?" my mom asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you decided to change the rules of your relationship unilaterally, and when Mike applied those same rules in a way you didn't like, you came here hoping we'd pressure him to go back to the old arrangement." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma sat there staring at her half-eaten pot roast, probably realizing that her carefully planned family intervention had just backfired spectacularly. "Emma," my dad said gently, "I've got to ask, where did you get the idea to establish these boundaries in the first place?" "I've been reading about healthy relationship dynamics," she said weakly. "Reading or talking to someone?" my mom pressed. Emma's phone buzzed on the table, and I caught a glimpse of Jessica's name on the screen. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. "Jessica?" my mom asked, reading the notification upside down. "Your coworker who just got divorced?" Emma nodded reluctantly. "The same Jessica who's been telling anyone who'll listen that her ex-husband was emotionally abusive because he expected her to cook dinner and remember his birthday?" Kevin added. "That's not. She's been helping me understand relationship dynamics," Emma said, but even she seemed to hear how weak it sounded. "Honey," my mom said, her voice taking on the patient tone she used when she was about to deliver a life lesson. "I've been married to your father for 32 years. I've seen a lot of relationships work and a lot of relationships fail. And the ones that fail usually have one thing in common." Emma looked up. "They involve people who take advice from folks whose own relationships didn't work out." "Jessica's just trying to help," Emma said, but there was no conviction left in her voice. "Is she?" my dad asked. "Because from here, it looks like she's trying to make you as miserable as she is." Monday evening, she came home looking defeated. "I called my dad today," she said, sitting down on the couch next to me. "But not too close. She was still maintaining her boundaries, after all. How's Tom doing? He asked me about you. About us." She picked at a thread on the cushion. "I told him about our situation. And what did he say?" "He asked me if I thought you were treating me badly before Wednesday. I waited. And I said no. You've always been good to me. Kind, supportive, all of it." "So what did he say to that?" "He said it sounded like I was trying to fix something that wasn't broken, and that maybe I should think about why I felt like I needed to change things." Her dad was a smart man, a mechanic who'd been married to Emma's mom for 30 years before she passed. He didn't use a lot of fancy words, but he understood relationships. He also said something about Jessica. What about her? He said taking relationship advice from someone who couldn't keep her own marriage together was like asking a mechanic who'd never fixed a car to work on your engine. I almost smiled at that. I think I made a mistake, she said quietly. Which part? All of it. The boundaries thing, listening to Jessica and Amanda, trying to change something that was working fine. She looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time all week. I was scared. Of what? That you were taking me for granted. That we were getting too comfortable and you'd stop trying. Did I give you reason to think that? No. But Jessica kept saying that all men need to be kept on their toes, and Amanda said I was being naive about maintaining independence. They made it sound like if I didn't establish control early, you'd start treating me badly. There it was. The real truth behind the boundaries and principles and emotional integrity. Fear, packaged in self-help language by women who'd watched their own relationships fail. So you decided to test me. I guess I did. And when you turned it around on me, I realized how manipulative the whole thing was. She turned to face me fully. I'm sorry. I'm really, really sorry. I studied her face, looking for signs that this was just another strategy, but the tears seemed genuine, and the defeat in her voice felt authentic. What about Jessica and Amanda? I told them both today that I wouldn't be taking relationship advice from them anymore. Jessica got mad and said this was all your fault for not playing along. She said I should make you choose between me and your family. And what did you tell her? I told her she was crazy, and I told her not to call me anymore. That was unexpected. I don't want to lose us over some stupid game that was never going to work anyway, she said, tears starting to flow. I love you. I love our life together, and I'm sorry I let other people convince me to mess with it. What about the boundary thing? I was wrong. Completely wrong. Wanting to be close to your girlfriend isn't disrespectful. It's normal. And using therapeutic language like a weapon was cruel. And the household stuff? I don't want a personal assistant. I want a partner. If I need help with something, I'll ask nicely and accept that you might say no sometimes, just like I might say no sometimes to other things. We talked for another hour, working through the details of what had happened and what needed to change. By the time we went to bed, things felt closer to normal than they had all week. That night, as we were getting ready for bed, she turned to me. Can I ask you something? Shoot. How did you know to use my exact words against me? I thought about it for a moment. Honestly, I was just angry at first. But then I realized that if you thought those words were reasonable in one situation, they should be reasonable in all situations. And when you kept arguing that it was different, that's when I knew it wasn't really about boundaries or principles. It was about control. She nodded slowly. I hate that I put us through this. Hey, I said, sitting down on the bed next to her. We worked it out. That's what matters. She leaned against me, and for the first time in a week, it felt natural instead of loaded with political meaning. I missed this, she said quietly. Missed what? Just being normal with each other. 3 months later, she came home from work with news that changed everything again, but in a completely different way. I got the promotion, she announced, standing in the kitchen doorway with a huge smile on her face. I nearly dropped the coffee mug I was holding. Marketing manager? Marketing manager, she confirmed. Salary bump, my own office, the whole thing. I crossed the room and wrapped her in a hug, lifting her off her feet. She laughed and held me tight. I'm so proud of you, I said. I couldn't have done it without your support these past few months. Especially after I almost sabotaged everything with that boundary nonsense. We'd been stronger since working through our problems. Not because conflict was good, but because we'd finally learned how to communicate honestly instead of playing games or following other people's scripts. Speaking of which, she said, pulling back to look at me, I found something while cleaning out my desk. She reached into her purse and pulled out that book, Boundaries in Love, the same one she'd been reading Wednesday night, which I'd noticed her carrying to work in her bag over the past few days. I was going to throw it away, but I thought you might want to see it first. I flipped through the pages, seeing all her highlighted passages about emotional independence and maintaining individual identity. It was like reading evidence from a crime scene. You know what's funny? I said, closing the book. Some of this stuff isn't actually wrong. Just not the way you were applying it. How do you mean? Like, it's good to maintain your own interests and friendships and sense of self. But that doesn't mean creating artificial distance from your partner. It means being a complete person who chooses to be close to someone, not someone who needs relationship strategies to feel in control. She nodded. Jessica and Amanda made it sound like relationships were these power struggles where someone always had to be winning. Well, Jessica's divorced twice and Amanda's going through a custody battle. Maybe not the best relationship role models. You think, she said, laughing. My dad was right. I was asking mechanics who'd never fixed a car to work on my engine. I tossed the book in the trash can. Good riddance, she said. So what do you want to do to celebrate the promotion? Actually, I was thinking we could start looking at bigger apartments. Maybe something in a nicer part of town. That sounds like a big step. It is a big step, but I think we're ready for big steps. I pulled her close again, and she didn't pull away or start talking about boundaries. She just melted into me like she had for 3 years before that weird week in March when she temporarily lost her mind. I love you, she said. I love you too. As we stood there in our little River West kitchen, making plans for our future, I realized something important. The whole boundary drama had actually made our relationship stronger. Not because conflict was good, but because we'd learned how to communicate honestly, how to spot manipulation disguised as self-improvement, and how to trust each other instead of listening to outside voices. Some lessons are worth learning, even if they come wrapped in temporary chaos. This was definitely one of them. 6 months after Emma's promotion, we moved into a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment in the 3rd Ward. A year after that, I proposed. She said yes immediately, without needing to consult any books or friends about whether accepting was compatible with maintaining her sense of self. We got married on a sunny Saturday in Milwaukee's Riverside Park, with both our families there. Tom walked her down the aisle, and in his speech at the reception, he mentioned that the best relationships are built by 2 complete people who choose each other every day, not by people who need strategies to manage each other. Jessica wasn't invited to the wedding. Neither was Amanda. But that's a different story entirely. The important thing is this. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to a relationship is a week where everything goes wrong, because that's when you find out what you're really made of together. And sometimes you discover that what you're made of is stronger than you ever imagined. Dear listeners, that's our ending. If it resonated, subscribe to support the channel. See you next time.